Everyone tells you the same thing. Stand up straighter, speak with more conviction, set a boundary, hold the line, and eventually people will treat you the way you deserve. And you've probably tried some version of that. You rehearsed the firm reply. You practiced the calm, level voice in your head on the drive over. You told yourself that this time you wouldn't shrink. But Carl Jung understood something that turns all of that advice inside out. The way people treat you isn't something you can negotiate from the outside. It's the visible surface of an agreement you already made somewhere deep inside yourself, in a place so quiet you don't even remember signing it. And until that inner agreement changes, nothing on the outside will hold. You can demand respect all day long. If you don't grant it to yourself first, people feel the gap between what you're asking for and what you actually believe you're worth. And they respond to the belief, not the demand. Jung spent decades studying how the inner world leaks into the outer one. He watched patients who were intelligent, capable, even accomplished, describe relationships in which they were consistently overlooked, talked over, taken for granted. And their question was always the same. Why do people treat me this way? What they couldn't see was that the treatment matched something. It matched a verdict they had already passed on themselves, long ago, and had been quietly enforcing ever since. He called the mechanism behind this projection. What we can't accept in ourselves, we hand to the world to carry. And the contempt you won't look at directly has a way of showing up in the eyes of everyone around you. Today I want to walk you through what Jung actually discovered about this, why self-respect isn't the same thing as confidence, why the disrespect you keep encountering is often a mirror rather than an accident, and what it really costs to change the agreement you've been living under. Because if you keep meeting the same treatment in different faces, there's a reason. And it isn't that you're unlucky. It's that something inside you keeps signing the same contract. Let me describe the contract because that's where this begins. Every relationship you have runs on a silent agreement about your worth. Not the things you say out loud, the terms underneath. How much of yourself you're allowed to take up, how quickly you'll apologize when there's tension, even tension you didn't cause. Whether your needs get raised at all, or whether you fold them up small and tuck them away before anyone notices. These terms are almost never spoken. They're transmitted in 1,000 tiny signals. The way you laugh a beat too fast to smooth things over. The way you say, "It's fine," when it isn't. The way you brace before you ask for something you have every right to ask for. And here's the part almost nobody wants to hear. You co-authored those terms. You didn't write them alone, and you didn't write them consciously, but your signature is on the page. Every time you accepted less than you needed and called it being easygoing. Every time someone crossed a line and you rushed to explain why they probably didn't mean it. Every time you made yourself smaller so the room would stay comfortable. Each of those was a small clause added to the contract, and the people around you learned to read it perfectly. Jung would tell you that people are extraordinarily sensitive to this, far more than they're consciously aware of. There's a level beneath words where one psyche reads another, and what it reads is not your resume or your intentions. It reads your relationship with yourself. Somebody meets you, and within minutes, their unconscious has answered a single question. How does this person treat themselves? And then, almost automatically, they follow suit. They take the cue you're giving them. You've handed them a manual for how to handle you, and most people simply do what the manual says. This is why the confidence advice fails so often. You can walk into a room with your shoulders back and your voice steady, but if underneath that posture there's a person who doesn't believe they deserve to be there, the two signals contradict each other, and the deeper signal always wins. People sense the contradiction even when they can't name it. They feel the performance, and something in them relaxes its respect, because a performance is a request for approval, and a request for approval reveals exactly where the power sits. Think about someone you've known who genuinely respected themselves. Not the loud kind. Not the person who needed everyone to know how important they were. Think of the quiet kind, the one who could sit in a disagreement without getting defensive, who could say no without a paragraph of justification attached, who didn't flinch when someone was displeased with them. There was a stillness to that person, and you probably noticed that people treated them differently, almost carefully, without anyone deciding to. That stillness wasn't a technique. It came from an internal agreement that was already settled. They weren't asking the room to decide their worth, because the question had already been answered somewhere they couldn't be reached. Now, compare that to what happens inside you when someone dismisses you. If you're honest, there's often a strange, quiet moment where part of you agrees with them. A voice that says, "Of course they don't take you seriously, why would they?" And that agreement is the whole problem, because the disrespect from outside only wounds so deeply because it lands on a wound that was already there. It confirms a verdict you'd already reached. The stranger who talks over you in a meeting isn't telling you anything you hadn't already whispered to yourself for years. Jung called that inner verdict part of the shadow, the collection of everything about yourself you've judged as unacceptable and pushed out of sight. And the shadow doesn't stay buried. It works. It runs in the background, shaping who you're drawn to, what you'll tolerate, what feels normal. If your shadow carries a deep conviction that you're not quite enough, that you're too much, that you're a burden, that your needs are shameful, then you will, without ever deciding to, arrange a life that keeps confirming it. You'll gravitate toward people who treat you the way you secretly believe you deserve. And you'll experience their treatment as painful proof of a truth, rather than what it actually is, a reflection you could learn to stop projecting. To understand where the contract gets written, you have to go back further than the meeting room or the marriage or the friendship that drains you. You have to go back to where you first learned what you were worth, because nobody arrives at self-contempt on their own. It's taught, usually early, usually by people who didn't mean to teach it, and often so subtly that there was never a single moment you could point to. A child learns their worth from how they're responded to. When a small child reaches out and is met, held, answered, delighted in, they build an inner sense that says, "I matter, my presence is good, my needs make sense." When a child reaches out and is met with irritation, distraction, coldness, or is only met when they perform, when they achieve, when they take care of the adult instead of the other way around, they learn something else. They learn that their raw self isn't quite acceptable, that love has conditions, that the safest thing to do is watch the people around them very closely and become whatever keeps the peace. Imagine a boy who learns that when he's quiet and helpful and asks for nothing, the house stays calm. And when he has a need, when he's scared or wants something or takes up too much space, the atmosphere turns. Maybe there's an explosion, maybe just a sigh, a withdrawal, a coldness that feels like the floor dropping out. That boy doesn't think, "My parent has a limitation." Children can't think that. They think, "Something about me is the problem," and he adjusts. He becomes low maintenance. He becomes the easy one, the one who doesn't need much. And everyone praises him for it, which seals the lesson in. His self-erasure gets rewarded, so it becomes his identity. That boy grows into a man who cannot understand why he's always the one who gets overlooked, why partners take and take, why friends lean on him but never ask how he's doing. He built a self designed to disappear, and then he wonders why the world keeps agreeing to his disappearance. The contract was written when he was 6. He's just never read the fine print. Jung understood that these early adaptations become what he called the persona, the mask we develop to move through the world safely. The persona isn't a bad thing on its own. Everyone has one. But when the persona is built entirely around not needing anything, around being agreeable, around never being a problem, it becomes a cage. Because a persona built on self-erasure can only attract relationships that require self-erasure. You draw in the exact dynamics your mask was designed to survive. And this is where the pattern gets its terrible momentum. The disrespect confirms the inner belief. The inner belief shapes your behavior. The behavior invites more of the same treatment, around and around, each turn tightening. You're not stuck because you're weak. You're stuck because the whole system is coherent. It hangs together. Every part reinforces every other part, and there's no obvious place to break in. Most people try to break in at the wrong point. They try to change the other people. They explain, they plead, they set the boundary and then abandon it the moment someone pushes back. They find a new relationship, a new job, a new group of friends, and they're genuinely bewildered when the same dynamic reassembles itself around them within months. New faces, same contract, because they carried the author with them. The author was never the other person. It was the agreement they hold inside about what they're worth. If any of this is landing a little too close, if you're recognizing your own life in these patterns and feeling that particular ache of being seen, I want to mention something before we go further into how this actually changes. We put together a guide called True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's work, built specifically for the slow work of finding the terms you signed on to without knowing it, and learning to read them for the first time. It's not a quick fix because there isn't one. It's a way to sit with these questions honestly instead of circling them. If that's something you need right now, the link is below. And then let's talk about what it actually takes to change the agreement. The first thing to understand is that self-respect is almost nothing like what we've been sold. We picture it as a kind of armor, being unbothered, being tough, walking away without a backward glance, feeling nothing. But that version is often just another persona, a hardened one, built to make sure no one can hurt you again. It looks strong from the outside and it's brittle underneath, because it's still organized entirely around other people. It's still reacting to the fear of being disrespected. Real self-respect isn't armor. It's the quiet, settled relationship with yourself that makes armor unnecessary. Jung described the aim of psychological development as individuation, the long process of becoming who you actually are underneath every adaptation you made to survive. And self-respect is what individuation feels like from the inside as it takes hold. It's the gradual reclaiming of the parts of yourself you exiled, the needs you called shameful, the anger you weren't allowed to have, the desires you decided were too much. Bringing those back into the fold one by one and saying, "This belongs to me, and it has a right to exist." Because here's what almost nobody connects. You cannot respect a self you're still at war with. And most people who struggle with self-respect are in a quiet, constant war with themselves. They've split into a part that lives, and a part that watches and criticizes and finds the living part wanting. That inner critic is often the internalized voice of whoever first taught them their worth was conditional. It runs commentary all day. "That was stupid. You're too much. Why did you say that? You're falling behind. Nobody actually likes you." And you can't demand that the world treat you with a dignity you won't extend to yourself in the privacy of your own mind. So the change doesn't begin with confrontation. It begins with attention. You have to start noticing the 1,000 small moments of self-abandonment that you've stopped seeing because they're so automatic. The moment someone says something dismissive and you laugh along. The moment you feel a no rising in your chest and swallow it and say, "Sure, no problem." The moment you apologize for taking up a normal amount of space. These are the moments where the contract gets renewed, again and again, in tiny signatures you don't even feel yourself making. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because it means the work isn't out there with the people who mistreat you. It's in here, in the exact instant you betray yourself and call it keeping the peace. That's the hard mirror Jung's work forces you to look into. You are not only the victim of the pattern, you are also, in these small recurring moments, its enforcer. Not because you're to blame for what was done to you as a child, you never were, but because the enforcement mechanism now lives in you, and you're the only one with access to it. There's a strange grief in seeing this clearly for the first time. Realizing how many times you sold yourself short and called it humility, how many times you accepted crumbs and called it gratitude, how long you performed the role of the person who needs nothing, and how much you actually needed the whole time. But underneath that grief, there's something else, and it's the most important thing in all of this. If you're the one enforcing the contract, then you're also the one who can stop. What does stopping look like? It's smaller and slower than you'd think. It starts with a single moment where you feel the old signature about to happen, the reflexive apology, the swallowed no, the laugh that smooths over the insult, and you don't do it. You just pause. You let the discomfort be there. You let the room stay slightly uncomfortable instead of rushing to fix it with a piece of yourself. And in that pause, you're doing something revolutionary. You're refusing to abandon yourself for the sake of someone else's comfort. That's the entire game, repeated 10,000 times. The people around you will notice, and they will not, at first, be happy about it. This is the part the confidence gurus never warn you about. When you change the contract, the people who benefited from the old terms will push back, and often hard. Because your self-erasure wasn't only costing you, it was serving them. Your endless availability freed them from having to consider you. Your reflexive apologizing let them off the hook for their behavior. Your smallness gave them room. When you stop performing those functions, the system destabilizes, and systems fight to restore themselves. You'll be called selfish, difficult, cold. You've changed, they'll say, and they won't mean it as praise. Jung recognized that genuine change almost always looks like dysfunction to the people invested in your old self. The friend who only ever called when they needed something will be genuinely wounded when you stop dropping everything. The partner who counted on your guilt will escalate when the guilt stops working. And you'll feel in those moments an almost unbearable pull to go back, to apologize, to smooth it over, to return to being the easy one. Because the old role, as painful as it was, at least felt safe. It was familiar. It kept people close, even if the closeness was hollow. Imagine a woman who spent 15 years being the one everyone leaned on, the reliable one, the one who never made a fuss, the one whose own needs had become almost invisible to her because they'd been invisible to everyone else for so long. Then, something in her begins to shift. She starts saying no. Not dramatically, just occasionally, where before she'd have automatically said yes. She stops explaining herself. She lets a phone call go unanswered when she's exhausted. And within weeks, the people around her are telling her she's not herself anymore, that she's become distant, selfish even. And the terrifying thing is that part of her agrees with them, because that part still holds the old contract. She has to sit in that discomfort, being called selfish for the crime of finally having a self, and not sign the paper again. This is the threshold most people can't cross. Not because they can't see the pattern. Plenty of people see it clearly. They cross it or they don't, based on whether they can tolerate being disliked by people who only ever liked their compliance. And that toleration is brutal, especially for someone who learned as a child that being disliked meant being unsafe. Your whole nervous system will scream that you're in danger. You're not. You're just being an adult who no longer needs everyone's approval to feel like they have a right to exist. But it will feel like danger, and you'll have to walk through it anyway. What waits on the other side is worth the crossing. Because as you stop abandoning yourself, something shifts that you can't force directly. The people who were only ever there for your compliance drift away, and it hurts less than you feared, because you finally see the connection for what it always was. And into the space they leave, different people begin to appear. People who are comfortable with someone who has needs, boundaries, opinions, a self. Relationships built on the ground of two whole people instead of one person feeding on another's disappearance. This doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen because you willed it. It happens because you changed the signal, and the signal changed who could stay. And the treatment you get from the world begins, slowly, to shift too. Not because you learned to demand respect, because you stopped broadcasting the instructions for how to disrespect you. The manual you were handing everyone got rewritten by the way you started treating yourself. People still read it, the way they always did. But now it says something different. Here's the piece Jung understood that makes all of this cohere. You cannot fake this. You cannot perform self-respect into existence, because the whole mechanism runs on the level beneath performance. The stillness of the self-respecting person isn't a posture they adopted. It's the outward form of a settled inner question. And the only way to settle the question is to actually do the work of reconciling with yourself, of bringing your exiled parts home, of stopping the internal war, of granting yourself the dignity you keep hoping someone else will grant you first. That's the trap, isn't it? You've been waiting for the respect to come from outside, believing that once enough people treat you well, you'll finally feel worthy. Jung saw that it runs the other direction entirely. The feeling of worth has to come first, from within, generated by the way you treat yourself in the small, invisible moments, and then the outside catches up. Waiting for the world to hand you your worth is waiting for water to run uphill. It was always meant to flow from the source, and you are the source. You always were. There's a reason this is so hard to accept. If your worth depends on other people, then it's out of your hands. And while that's painful, it's also strangely comfortable. It means you're not responsible. You can keep hoping, keep performing, keep waiting for someone to finally see you and validate you and make it all okay. The moment you accept that the source is you, the waiting has to end. And the responsibility that comes with that can feel enormous. But it's also the only door out, because a worth that depends on others can be taken away by others. A worth you generate yourself can't be touched. None of this means becoming hard or closed or indifferent to people. That's the counterfeit version, and Jung would have seen right through it. The person who is genuinely reconciled with themselves is often more open than they've ever been, not less. They can hear criticism without collapsing, because their worth isn't on the table every time someone disagrees with them. They can be close to people without disappearing into them. They can love without losing themselves in the loving. The self-respect makes the intimacy possible, rather than threatening it, because there's finally a self solid enough to meet another person without dissolving. And they can walk away from what genuinely disrespects them, not from a wounded, reactive place, but from a quiet clarity. When you respect yourself, mistreatment stops being confusing. You don't spend 3 weeks analyzing whether you overreacted, whether you deserved it, whether you should have handled it differently. You feel the violation the way a healthy body feels a burn, immediately, unmistakably, and you move. Not with drama. With the simple recognition that this isn't a place your dignity is welcome, and so you'll take it elsewhere. If you've been feeling all of this stir as I've been talking, the recognition, the ache, the reluctant sense that the person who's been enforcing your smallest agreements might be you, then this is exactly the terrain the true self-discovery guide was made for. The 24 exercises are built to help you find those invisible signatures, the automatic moments of self-abandonment, and to start meeting the exiled parts of yourself instead of managing them. It won't do the crossing for you. Nothing can. But it can keep you company while you learn to stop signing the old contract. You'll find it linked below. I want to be honest with you about something before we close, because the honesty matters more than the encouragement. This doesn't fully resolve. There's no final day where you've achieved self-respect and it's done and locked in place. The old contract was written over years, and its language is fluent in you. Under stress, under exhaustion, in the presence of certain people who remind your body of the ones who first taught you your worth was conditional, the old reflexes will resurface. You'll catch yourself apologizing for nothing. You'll feel the no get swallowed before you can stop it. And in those moments, the temptation will be to conclude that you failed, that you're back where you started, that nothing really changed.
You haven't failed. You've just met the pattern again, which is different from being controlled by it. The measure of the work isn't whether the old agreement ever whispers to you, it always will. The measure is how quickly you notice and how gently you bring yourself back. Self-respect, in the end, is less a state you achieve than a relationship you tend, a way of turning toward yourself again and again, especially in the moments you'd rather turn away. And the strangest gift in all of it is what happens to your compassion for other people. You'd think that reclaiming your worth would harden you toward the ones who took advantage of your smallness. Sometimes, at first, there's anger, and the anger is healthy, because it's the part of you that always knew you deserved better finally speaking up. But past the anger, there's usually an understanding, because you recognize the pattern in them too. The ones who couldn't respect you often couldn't respect themselves, and were running their own version of the same machinery, projecting their own contempt onto whoever would hold it. You don't have to stay near them, but you can see them clearly without needing them to be monsters,
and that clarity is its own kind of freedom. So the question isn't really whether other people will respect you. That question keeps you facing the wrong direction, scanning faces, waiting for a verdict that was never theirs to give. The real question is the one Jung would put to you directly, and it's harder because you can't outsource the answer. Are you willing to stop enforcing the agreement that says you're worth less than you are? Are you willing to sit in the discomfort of disappointing people who only ever loved your disappearance? Are you willing to treat yourself, in the smallest, invisible moments, as someone who has a right to be here? Because the truth, Jung spent his life circling, is that the outer world is, to a remarkable degree, a mirror of the inner one. And you've been standing in front of that mirror, hurt by the reflection, trying to change the glass. The disrespect you keep meeting isn't a life sentence, and it isn't your fault. But it is, in part, a reflection. And the reflection changes when you do, not before, and not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped agreeing to be treated as less than the person you actually are. Until you respect yourself, they won't. Not because the world is cruel, though sometimes it is, because people take their cue from the one you're giving them, and you've been giving them the wrong one your whole life without knowing you had a choice. Now you know. The pen has always been in your hand. The contract can be rewritten, and the first signature on the new one isn't something you say to anyone else. It's a quiet moment, alone, where the old reflex rises, and you decide, just this once, and then again and again, not to abandon yourself. That's where it begins. That's where it always begins. And no one can do it for you, which is the hardest part, and also the whole point. If you haven't yet, take a look at our guide, True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's work, made for exactly this kind of turning inward, for finding the agreements you never knew you signed and learning, slowly, to write new ones. The link is right below.